Go, Simon.
All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Sorry for the delay, a couple of minutes. There were some technical issues in starting the webinar. Now we are all good. It's good to see a lot of faces. I'm just looking at the people here participating. I can recognize a few people, so that's great. Hello there, Atley, Bruno, Eric. Hello, Gabriela. Hello as well. And I can see a few of them. Lucia, Manfred, Natalia is here. Ralph, hi there. Roshan, Sasotia. So we have quite a few people from different parts of the world. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening if you're connecting from Asia late. All right. Welcome to this webinar on ESG. Okay. I'll be your host, Manish Shanberg from EIPM, and I'll take you through the webinar today. Okay. In terms of logistics, this is going to last around 40 minutes roughly. Okay. And then we have some time for questions and answers, if at all, towards the end of the webinar, right? So you have in the chat the possibility to write your comments or questions. Okay, I have my colleague Eric, who is behind as well, who is helping me in moderating the chat, or if we face any technical issues, that will be solved as well. So thank you, Eric, for doing that. Okay, so what we are going to do today, this is a webinar on ESG. We're going to look at the following topics. Let's say we're going to start off with the basic 101 of what ESG is. Okay, we're going to look at the different areas to consider within the ESG domain, let's say, and then some examples of what are the benefits of good ESG actions, and then eventually some examples, some very basic examples of what companies have done, and eventually, if you want to start off your program within your organizations, there are some prerequisites and basic guidelines on what can be done to start executing your ESG commitments. Okay, so this is what we're going to look at today. All right. Okay, so we'll start off with the real basic one. What is ESG? Okay, and this is the term itself, the ESG term itself, is not very new. Okay, it's not very new. The first was the first time the term was coined originally was almost 20 years ago. Okay, and this was by some UN freethinkers, so UN Global Impact Reports. So these reports had this term first coined around 2004. Okay, so roughly 20 years ago. Even before that, there was talk about this since 50, 60 years, but the term itself, ESG, was not coined by them. Okay, and now we can see that it has gained popularity, right? And it has become one of the top agenda points for companies today. Okay, so we're going to see what it is exactly. What does it encompass? So E here stands for environmental, right? S is for social and G is for governance. So we know that. And when we talk about governance, we are leaning a bit more towards corporate governance. Okay, so that's ESG, environment, social, and governance. Okay, and then there are certain things inside each of these three pillars. So when we talk about environment, there are some examples given here. We talk about pollution, climate change, deforestation, biodiversity loss, and so on. We're going to look at each of these a little bit more in detail in the next few slides. When we talk about social, we talk about human rights, child labor, labor standards in general, even product safety that impacts social aspects, employee relations, and so on. And then we talk about the governance part, which is all about accounting, the composition of the board, executive salaries and pays, and tax avoidance, bribery, corruption, rights of shareholders, and so on and so forth, right? So all these elements are basically the factors. Okay, these are the factors that affect the company's ability to create long-term value. Okay, that's the essence, let's say. These are all factors that affect the company's ability to create long-term value. Okay, and we're going to go a little bit more and understand each of these. What are different areas to consider? We're going to go a little bit more in detail of each of these, and also what are the other things like metrics, the frameworks that are present in ESG, and so on and so forth. So we're going to see those in a few seconds from now. Okay. Right. So what are the different areas to consider in ESG? So we talked about these three pillars, right? Environment, social, and governance. Um, in the environment side, we can see some elements, right? So typically when we talk about the first one, for example, right, we talk about greenhouse gas emissions, or GHG emissions, as we call them. This would also include some areas like net zero actions or decarbonization actions or decarbonation actions and so on. There is air pollution. So companies that take actions to monitor and control and reduce air pollution. So the same thing with water pollution or land pollution, right? So there is another element like waste management. So what is the impact that the company has on land and water when they are managing waste? How much of it is being recycled, etc., etc. So all these comes under the waste management part. You have energy management, and how can you improve efficiency, right? Or in energy management, land use, climate risk. This is not an exhaustive list. Okay, there are some examples of this. This is not an exhaustive list. There could be like other topics like circular economy as well that can be put under this overall consideration of the environment, right? So there could be some other topics. There is also animal rights, like we have human rights on the social. There is biodiversity preservation and animal rights as well that can be put in the environment part. Okay, so there could be some other elements that get in. And when we talk about the different frameworks, there are subtle differences amongst these different frameworks. Okay, so that's the environment part. Everything that somehow contributes to having an impact on the environment. That's the E part when we talk about the E part of the ESG. Okay. Then we come to social. So in social, as you can see, the first one is the DEI, as we say, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this diversity, equity, and inclusion is in the entire supply chain. So when we talk about our customers, our own employees, and our suppliers, so in the entire supply chain, our suppliers, so downstream and upstream, both, whether we have, there's an impact. You could have an impact only to a certain level, but as a measure, we talk about the overall supply chain. Okay, then we have human rights. We have health and safety of the people that work with you, not only your own direct employees. Maybe you have some other stakeholders coming and working in your locations. The health and safety of those people. There could be clients who might be coming and working, suppliers who might be coming and working. So overall health and safety of people working in your premises, your environment, roughly. You have labor relations and practices, privacy of customers, data protection, privacy, and so on. And then we also talked about product quality and safety, which will have an impact on these people. Okay, so that's all these aspects. They are the S part of this ESG framework. Okay, and then we come to G, the governance part. So as I said, it's largely corporate governance, but it's a little bit more than that as well. We talk about corporate governance and oversight. Okay, then we have risk management. This is a big part of the governance. Plenty of companies today have kicked off these very specific initiatives on risk management. So those that tracking comes under the governance part. There could be slight overlaps as well. So if we say risk management, there could be some elements where you're considering environment impact and social impact as well. But in terms of reporting, they all fall under the governance pillar. Okay. Then there is conflict of interest. There is transparency on how you do the reporting, how open you are in terms of reporting, and how open you are for external and internal audits. And then you have fraud, anti-bribery, anti-corruption controls that all fit in the governance, the executive pay, the shareholders' rights, and so on and so forth. So all this is what gets in the governance part. Right. So the very notion, and we talked about this previous slide here, is that these are all the factors, as we see here on the last line below. These are all factors that affect the company's ability to create long-term value. This is what we mentioned, right? And these are all the factors that we talk about eventually. So what they're doing is overall, it is providing companies or stakeholders and investors with a framework. Okay, with a framework. This is like a framework to assess your company's impact on society and environment, and then, of course, with that, improve governance and adhere to compliance and regulations. Okay, I've put on in the next slide a bit of confusion that happens sometimes with people that I talk to and meet with. Uh, to say, Manish, what are the different areas? Sometimes we hear about CSR, we talk about sustainability, ESG. So I thought I'll put that across as well to make a little bit of differentiation. What is sustainability, CSR, and ESG? So I've just put in this where we talk about CSR versus ESG versus sustainability. Okay. Now, if we consider sustainability like a superset, for example, okay, so to make it simple, as I said, to make it simple, one could consider ESG and CSR as subsets of sustainability. Okay, so we know about sustainability. Sustainability largely talks about, right from the origins of the word, the notion of sustainability till even today, we talk about the triple bottom line, the three P's, right? People, profit, and planet, right? So people is largely linked to social, as you can see. Planet is largely linked to the environment, as you can see, and then the profit is largely linked to the economic behavior of the organization. Right, so that's an overview when we talk about sustainability. Whereas CSR, which is corporate social responsibility, and ESG can be considered as subsets. So they are actions or frameworks that fall within the entire sustainability superset. There are other topics in sustainability, right, that can be outside of your CSR and ESG framework. But these days, in terms of metrics and following and reporting, etc., ESG is becoming more and more, let's say, popular and more standardized. Today, unfortunately, we don't have one big standard measurement, let's say. There are different frameworks and there are subtle differences amongst these, but we're getting there. Eventually, we will probably get to a standard framework in the coming years, right? So what does CSR consider? CSR is largely a self-driven, a company-driven initiative, right? And self-regulated. So as a company, I can decide this is what my CSR, corporate social responsibility actions are going to be, right? It's self-driven. The company can decide, they can choose, they can say yes or no to few things, right? Whereas ESG is regulated externally. So there are these frameworks. For example, if you're in Europe, so in Europe, the most recent regulation that came out, that I think there are 50,000 companies for whom the ESG reporting will be made mandatory from 2025 onwards. Okay, so this is externally regulated by regulatory authorities, right? Whereas CSR is more self-driven and self-regulated at the company level. ESG is going to be a bit more larger than this and externally regulated, right? So you can also draw a parallel to ISO standards, right? So we have a standard, like you have the ISO standards. It is fairly regulated all over the world with some standards and definitions which are fairly similar, right? So ESG is moving towards that. It's an externally regulated framework, whereas CSR is a bit more self-driven and self-regulated. Then you also have differences in measurements. ESG is very quantitative, right? Very quantitative, where CSR, we're talking about qualitative measures as well, which is then falling on a bit of subjectivity, whereas ESG is a bit more quantitative. Okay, then that comes to the measurable goals with milestones, audits, and so on and so forth. Whereas the qualitative would eventually mean there's some soft measurements which talk about value and brand of the organization and so on and so forth. Right. A lot of the valuation of the business is considering the ESG ratings. So there is business valuations which are done by asset managers or investors or even robo advisors. So you have AI, which is evaluating companies based on their ESG ratings and are deciding the investments to be done on organizations based on the rating results. Right. So there's a lot of business valuation because it is very quantified, externally regulated with measurable goals and milestones. The a lot of the investors are doing business valuation using the ESG criteria. Okay, and not so much in CSR. So this is the subtle differences that exist, and as you can see here, sustainability as a superset is a combination of both these aspects. There are certain things which overlap as well, and it's a combination of these aspects. Okay, I've just added on a little bit. It's not. It's one of the prerequisites. Let's say if you want to start off an ESG program with the organization, let's say, or want to follow certain frameworks with all these different things that you, then I would say that before embarking on to moving to an externally regulated framework, the step one could be to see what can I do ourselves. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but if you look at the path, the company path towards certain goals of about sustainability, where we have, for example, in sustainability, we also talk about the SDG goals, like the millennial goals that were decided a few years ago, the 17 big brackets that we have on SDGs, right? If you want to achieve there, I would say the first step is to look at a self-driven, self-regulated metrics, and then go beyond that to this external framework that we talked about, and then combination will lead to then achieving some of these SDG goals. Okay, but in simple terms, if I have to summarize this, consider ESG and CSR as subsets of sustainability. CSR, self-driven, qualitative aspects of it with no business valuation, whereas ESG is very quantitative, measured, and externally regulated, with the external regulations then results in business valuations by investors. Okay, so this is the difference that we see between CSR, ESG, and then overall getting under the umbrella of sustainability. All right, so now we have all these different terminologies, right, in the ESG world. Let's say, so I've just put 6 main brackets, let's say. First, in the ESG, we talked about metrics. We just mentioned that it is very quantitative in nature, right? The framework itself is very quantitative in nature, which means there are certain hard metrics to be put in place. So let's say, for example, you have greenhouse gas emissions. Talked about that. That's one of the metrics. So within this, there could be your carbon disclosure projects, CDP, as we see, or you have net zero commitments or decarbonation projects, you know, with your right kind of measurements. How many tons of CO2 is released, or what is your net contribution to the carbon footprint, and so on and so forth. So all these metrics are falling under this category. Then you have DEI, for example, the diversity, equity, and inclusion metrics. You know, what is the percentage of particular gender in the overall organization, in the executive board, etc. What is the if there are minority communities, and so on and so forth. So all these kind of metrics fall under DEI. And then you have compliance, different types of compliance metrics as well, financial metrics as well. So this is just 3 examples that I've given you, but there are tons of tens or hundreds of metrics like this, where we are talking about concrete measurements. Okay, concrete measurements, very quantitative and regulated, right? So that's the metrics part. Then we have these different frameworks. So today there are plenty of frameworks, right, which include all these metrics. The most common one is the Global Reporting Initiative. So this is GRI, right? Today it is used by a few companies already, the most popular one, but there are other types of frameworks as well, right? The Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, so SASB, or you have the TCFD, which is the Task Force for Climate-Based Financial Disclosure. Task Force on Climate-Based Financial Disclosure. You have some others as well, right? Which is the International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB. Or there is also in Europe, for example, there is a European Sustainability Reporting Standards, ESRS, right? So there are many frameworks today which are available, and there are subtle differences amongst these frameworks. Okay, as I said, there could be 100 metrics in one, maybe there is 105 in other, there is 95 in others. There could be variations based on the industry, based on the domain, the region, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, today we are getting towards a standardization, like the ISO example that I talked about, but we are not there yet. The most common one today used is the GRI. Okay, like you have for net zero, you have science-based target initiative, the SBTI, right? Something similar. So you have GRI, Global Reporting Initiative, which is one of the common ones used, common frameworks used today for ESG reporting. Okay. So we talked about the metrics, the frameworks that include all these different metrics. Then there are ratings. So you have ratings as well. As I said, it is very quantitative, right? So we talk about ratings. So all the ratings related to these frameworks and metrics considered. So they have ratings, and you have a rating which tells you you're doing good or not doing good, or whatever on these different metrics that you have. And there are different rating agencies as well which do that. For example, you have Dun & Bradstreet, which does the Moody's, S&P Global, which does this as well. EcoVadis here, which does this. So you have plenty of rating agencies like this, which give organizations ratings on these different ESG metrics. Okay. You have audits. We talked about audits. These are maybe conducted by external auditors. There could be there are companies that specialize in ESG audits, and they could audit your organization and give you the right rating based on all these metrics, and choosing a particular framework that you have, which is most relevant to your industry. You have risks also, of course, that go along with that. So the higher the rating, you have the rating scales. The better the rating, you have different types of benefits that we will see in a bit. But it also means that if you have a lower rating, there are certain risks of reputational damage, fines, right? Because they are regulated, there could be regulatory fines as well, and so on. So there are risks that we also need to consider. And then finally, the reporting. So based on the framework, you have certain reporting standards. Again, this includes all the metrics where you have to have certain way of reporting on all these metrics. Okay, so just to give you the different things that exist on the metrics, the frameworks that we talked about, different types of frameworks, the ratings which include these metrics and frameworks, and so on and so forth. Okay, that's overview on the terminology, the different areas to consider within ESG. Right. Then we look at some of the benefits of good ESG actions. Right, some of the benefits that we see. So this is fairly straightforward. I would say rather it's quite common sense. I would say, where we look at if we have a good ESG actions in your organization with a good declaration of results, with the right measurements, and so on and so forth, there are plenty of advantages that you could see. Not necessarily quantitative advantages always, but you have a lot of qualitative advantages as well. Okay, for example, here you have if you have a certain kind of rating on, let's say, governance or certain social aspects of it, then you could have the top line growth can contribute directly to the top line growth, the revenue growth. Yeah, you could tap new markets where the governments of these new markets are probably going to see the ratings and say, okay, this is an organization that can be trusted, that is good, and I'm going to allow a foreign investment in my country and allow them to tap this new market. Just as an example, yeah, you could also expand existing markets, right, that you have. So it's a direct contribution. A good ESG result is a direct contribution to your top line, right? ESG drives consumer preference also. We talk about millennials and some of the preferences that the millennial consumer has on green versus non-green alternatives. So there have been plenty of surveys all over the world on different industries, different domains, different regions, eventually pointing to the fact that the millennial consumer is more and more inclined towards green alternatives. Okay, more and more inclined towards green alternatives. Of course, there are plenty of other parameters that he or she is going to consider, but overall, they're more inclined towards green alternatives, even if today some of the green alternatives might be more expensive than the non-green alternatives. This is also changing. Green alternatives are getting cheaper and cheaper, and it is not we don't have a clear statistics saying that green is always more expensive. No, there are plenty of products where green is getting cheaper than the non-green alternatives. So it's a combination of the price that the consumer is willing to pay plus the green, the eco label behind it, right? So it's a consumer preference, and that is supposedly to last, or apparently it's going to last. In terms of a forecast, this is going to continue. So it's the company's own interest to catch this kind of a consumer where where the green alternative is a preferred choice. Okay. It can also help to reduce costs. So there are plenty of actions. Let's say if we talk about circular economy in the E pillar, waste management or the right utilization of spare parts, etc., again, can improve operational efficiency and thus help you reduce costs. The right kind of material to choose can also help you reduce costs. And I'll give you a couple of examples on some of this company cases which result in reducing costs as well. Further, you could have less regulatory and less legal interventions. If the governance part is very clear, very well reported, very well managed, then you have you avoid adverse government actions, you avoid penalties, you avoid regulatory fines, right, which could add up eventually and hurt your bottom line, right? So this is definitely a benefit of good ESG actions. And again, when you have less regulatory and legal interventions, you can also move to the top line growth to tap new markets and expand existing ones, as they would be all linked. Attracting and retaining quality talent. So these days, the talent or the employees also are looking forward that their company is doing good in ESG related actions, right? So it attracts and helps retain quality talent. And as we know, now we have some of the skilled talent dearth. Let's say companies finding it slightly difficult to have the right kind of skill in the labor. So once you have the right kind of skill, it's important to retain that skill within the organization. And good ESG actions will help you do that, because it's the employee's motivation that they want to work with companies which have good ESG actions. Okay. It also means that the employee productivity improves, right? Employees are more motivated also to work and improve their productivity. If you look at the last part here, again, another benefit of asset optimization, you could have sometimes some repurposing of dying assets. One of the examples I was reading about is oil tankers. Okay, oil tankers, they're being repurposed. We're trying to move towards more greener sources of energy, let's say. Yeah, so repurposing of dying assets. If you have also work from home, as simple as that, right? Work from home. So there are companies who have huge investments in infrastructure, and they're repurposing the infrastructure from office space. They're being changed to labs, okay, laboratories where you have research going on and so on. So there's a lot of repurposing of these assets, and this eventually will contribute to plenty of these other parameters that we talked about. It could be helping in reducing costs. It could also help in top line growth. It could help in employee productivity and so on and so forth. Okay, so these will be all linked. It's a bit of a matrix, all the benefits that you get, and one feeds on the other. Okay, so you've seen the benefits. This is a report. I thought this was interesting just to tell you what's at stake here. So I picked this up from a McKinsey report here, where we are talking about, just to give you an idea in terms of the financial impact, right? What is it at stake? So this is the good actions that we talk about, but all this to do what? There's a lot of financial stake here, right? A large share of corporate profits are at stake, from this engagement. And if you look at the different domains here, you have banks, you have automotive, and so on and so forth. We are talking about, let's say, automotive, aerospace and defense, around 50 to 60%, okay, in this particular sector is the estimated share of EBITDA, so earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, right? So around 50 to 60%, and this is at stake, right? So if we are a $10 billion organization, and we are talking about 5 to 6 billion is at stake here, right? And I think a lot of you are also coming from procurement background, where you have the cost of goods sold and other kind of expenses also that are included in this. So procurement can also have a very significant impact. So just to give you a highlight on the kind of money that is involved here, okay? So in banks, you have around 50 to 60%, which talk about certain consumer protection, systemic regulations, and so on. Automotives, we are talking about renewable regulations, carbon emissions regulations. If we talk about energy sector, I have some friends from energy sector here. So let's say if you're talking about renewable subsidies that the government gives, good ESG ratings, good benefits of ESG actions, higher the chance of getting renewable subsidies, tariff regulations, and so on. In purely FMCG consumer goods kind of products, we talk about food safety, health and wellness, fighting against obesity, the, transparency in labeling, and so on and so forth. Pharma and healthcare, same way, and so on and so forth. So you have plenty of, a lot is at stake financially. Okay, so a good ESG action with a good report, with good tracking, can result in impacting very high on the financial on the financial side. Okay, so this is something to be to remember, that whatever action we are trying to do in our ESG action plan, there's a lot at stake. Okay, right, and then we look at finally some of the actions, let's say, to execute. I've just started off with a very short company cases, one-liners. There's a lot of detail behind, but you can understand. I wouldn't go through all the details, but very simple processes, right, as company cases, which are the actions with the ESG commitments. And the next couple of slides, we will see, what do I do? Now I have the framework. Now, then how do I start? What do I do? So there's a guideline which is given as well. Okay. So first, here we talk about company cases. So if a company is, let's say there's a company which completely digitalized the invoicing process. Okay, as an action as simple as that. So I'm completely digitalizing the invoicing process. Let's say I have AI to collect invoices sent by suppliers, populate it in your ERP system automatically, check with the PO automatically, or maybe there's a little manual intervention there if there are changes to be done, and then the processing is done automatically, payment is done automatically. So the digitalization of invoicing can have an impact on dematerialization, no paper involved, optimized and efficient work of, and faster processing, and so on and so forth. There could plenty of benefits. So I won't go through all the benefits. You can probably see through it. But these are company actions, simple company actions, which can result and which are very much measurable, quantifiable, that can help you to say, okay, with this action, these are the benefits that I can quantify. Because remember, we talk about ESG, we talk about measurable, very much quantifiable. Okay. So you have embedding a remote hybrid working culture, We talk about asset optimization. This is a part of it, right? Embedding a remote and hybrid working culture, efficiency in working for the employees as well, and that also could improve some of the employee motivation, and so on and so forth. Some companies who have done innovation and come up with water-saving detergents or soaps, say they reported higher sales than the overall category. So in detergents category, water-saving detergents have reported higher sales than the category, especially in water-scarce environments. So they're contributing to the environment, they're contributing to their bottom line as well, finance. Renewable fuels is another area. Some companies who are doing preventive maintenance, right, to avoid failures of machines and so on and so forth, which can cost them a lot. Right? So this is a part of preventive maintenance, which is not only reducing costs, but also having a good impact in terms of governance, in terms of on-time delivery to the customers, suppliers being managed well, and you can see that they would eventually contribute to all three, largely with cost savings. Companies that have completely changed or in the process of changing their vehicle fleet to electric or hybrid, right? So you can see this another example here. Companies that on the social front, they have companies who have donated on behalf of their employees. The employee feels motivated. or for some social project, or purely asking the employee to volunteer on the field in some social upliftment projects, right? So this is the social part. So these are actions that are very much measurable, quantifiable, and this is what the company can declare in the reporting, which gives them a good ESG rating. Okay. And of course, in one other example, in agricultural sector, I pulled out supporting the downstream ecosystems. For example, this company which is discouraging farmers who use pesticides. Okay, try to use organic farming, less and less use of pesticides, try to eliminate pesticides altogether, and working together with the farmer to come up with this kind of innovative technology which can reduce completely the use of pesticides. Okay. So you're not only looking internally, but you're also supporting the downstream ecosystem. Again, that gives a certain rating to your ESG ratings. Okay, so this is some examples of what companies are doing today. Very simple cases, but all contributing to your ESG performance. All right. So next we look at, okay, so I've got this. So what do I do? So there are certain prerequisites. Okay, there are certain prerequisites. The first thing, if I have to do as an exercise before getting into formulating my ESG commitment, is I would want to understand what is my company's core competency. Okay, core competency. What do I, where do I work in, which industry, what domain, what is my core competency? And most of the companies with their ESG framework that they choose and the actions that they choose are along or supporting the core competency of a company. Okay, so that's the first thing I would like to understand. This is a prerequisite. So you could do an exercise around that. Integrating the customers in the feedback, trying to understand what is the customer most interested in, and so on. Integrating the employees, of course, as well. You should choose the measures in such a way that you could certainly measure and quantify the results, right? So more and more, as much quantifiable as possible. As I said, ESG reporting is quantifiable. You could also do benchmark with others in the industry, similar competition, or what is the competition doing? So benchmarking is a good exercise to see what others are also doing, and if there are gaps, if there are some really apparent actions that you should be taking, you could pick out from these benchmarking. Be completely aware of reporting laws and requirements, right? So this is something which is very important, and as I said before, this is going to be more and more regulated. I gave you an example. In the EU, this is going to happen in 2025. Around 50,000 organizations in the EU are supposed to mandatorily release their ESG reporting. So this is going to be, this is coming up. So better be prepared with all this. Understanding the interests of key investors. As I mentioned, the investors are doing the investing based on your ESG ratings as well. So there could be robo-advisors, as I mentioned. There could be asset managers or some other private investors like pension funds, insurance companies, and so on and so forth, who will be investing in organizations based on your ESG ratings as well, right? And then finally, you have to pick up the relevant ESG reporting framework, whether I should go with GRI, which is very much relevant to your business, or there could be other different frameworks that we talk about, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, or the TCFD for climate-based financial disclosure, and so on. So there are different frameworks, as I said, subtle differences, which include different types of metrics. But picking up the relevant ESG reporting framework for your organization becomes key. Eventually, they will get standardized, right? But as of now, it's not yet there. So picking up the right ESG framework is key. The most common one uses GRI, as I mentioned before. Okay, so having said that, this is what we do. So pick up the relevant ESG framework report. And then this is a bit more of running through the project effectively. Assemble a team, perform a materiality and business impact analysis. That's another thing. That's the first thing. It is like here we are talking about measuring and quantifying the result, looking at core competencies and so on. If you do a materiality and business impact analysis, this is going to answer a lot of these questions there, right? So what is absolutely core? What is absolutely relevant and most effective to your business? That's what we talk about when we say materiality, and the business impact that it will have. right? If you talk about double materiality also, so you have how you impact the environment and how and the surroundings around you, and how does the surroundings around you impact you as well. So this is where you have the double materiality analysis as well. So you could do that. Defining the measurable goals, right? Defining the measurable goals. So you have these different metrics based on the ESG reporting framework that you have picked up, and you define measurable goals. As I said, quantifiable. Okay. Develop a roadmap to meet these goals. Right. So you have from now on to 2025, 2028, whatever is your time frame that you talk about. So develop a roadmap to meet those goals with different milestones. Because when we talk about ESG, there are also milestone audits. Right. If you have a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, 15-year program, we're talking about milestones audits to see if you're going to reach that goal. Okay, and then of course you have implement all these actions, different actions that we have seen, for example, okay, which are eventually linked to these different metrics that you have chosen, and you report progress along the way. Okay, it's a very high overview of what is to be done. Now this has to be dwelled in. You have to jump into the details and find out a little bit more about this. There are a lot of consulting organizations who do this very specific task to help organizations set up their ESG reporting framework and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of work to be done, but this is a macro understanding on what are the different things that need to be considered if you have to put in ESG reporting framework and make action plans for your commitments. Okay. Right. So this is what we have seen overall. As a quick conclusion, we have seen what is ESG, the very basics. Yeah. What are the different areas to consider in ESG? So each of these pillars on environment, social, and governance, the different terminologies we talked about metrics, like greenhouse gas emissions. We talk about DEI and so on and so forth. The different frameworks like GRI, TFCD or ERSR, and so on and so forth. Okay. You have benefits of good ESG action, so some sample company cases as well, and of course all the benefits of top line growth, talent attraction, regulatory adherence, and even cost reductions and so on. And of course, what do I do eventually if I have to set up? So prerequisites, and then action plan of choosing the right ESG framework and setting up a team, putting in those measurable goals, milestones, and then eventually work on your action plans. Okay. So this is what I wanted to share with you today. Let's say a very quick 45-minute introduction to ESG and what it entails, and what do I need to do if I have to go back to my organization and put up something in place at the very basic level, just to get an understanding on what is ESG. We also looked at other important thing that we also looked at is what is the difference between CSR, ESG, and sustainability as a whole. So this is also something important that you can keep in mind when you go back and start off your action plans. Okay. All right, good. That's what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much. So we'll now open we have a few minutes for any questions you may have. Eric is moderating the chat. So yes, will we get the slides? Yes, Manfred, I think Eric has replied already. Yes, you'll receive the slide deck and also the link to replay this on the YouTube channel, for example. If you want to just have a replay, feel free to go back and look at it again. Okay, if you have any questions, comments, complaints, or let's say if you don't even agree with me on some aspects, feel free. Yeah, feel free, because that's an important part of the debate. Yeah. So yeah, there is one. Yeah. So a couple of how to choose the most common appropriate framework. So this is what I said. This is an important part. If you look at the prerequisites, yeah, one of the things that you do is look at your core competency. So if you're in the domain of, if you're in pharmaceutical industry or a banking industry or an energy industry, the core competencies or the materiality will be very different in this, right? So if you have to say, okay, GRI, if I look at GRI, this suits my industry very well. Okay, or if you look at the standards now, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, ESRS, there are some 10 or 12 major metrics which talk about pollution, which talk about, if you're in a services industry, which is a large service industry, maybe that may not be the right choice. Maybe GRI is one. So it really depends on your industry that you're working with, and based on your core competencies, you choose the right kind of framework, right? The GRI or SASB and so on and so forth. Any experience on EcoVadis? So EcoVadis is one. Personally, I don't have. I mean, when I was working with Alstom very many years ago, we used EcoVadis, but at that time we didn't have this kind of a framework with ESG in mind. So we had used them for different types of services. Personally, I don't have an experience directly working with EcoVadis. Maybe I can help you. Jacopo, if I know somebody, I can put you in touch. I have your email ID. I will check with Eric if there are organizations that have used this. Maybe they can share experience with this. But right now, I don't have a direct experience about this. Sorry about that. All right, Jacopo. Which company would be the very best in ESG? Which sector is the most advanced? Yeah, so a lot of regulations came in first when we talk about some of the financial institutions, right? In terms of maintaining a strict regulation, declaration, and so on and so forth. There are some matured manufacturing industries which are also very much ahead, doing a lot of contribution to environment, social, and governance. A lot of the non-profit organizations are also very good because, again, one of their core competencies, as I said, is that they're working on some specific aspects, and they are the very best in ESG. We are getting there. So there are some critiques also of ESG. Okay, maybe I can tell you here, there are some critiques also of ESG. Very recently, you would have probably heard Tesla, which was taken out of the S&P 500 global index, right, on ESG. And Elon Musk gave a very strong anti-ESG comment in there, that this is a lot politically driven and so on and so forth. So there are companies who might be doing good or bad, but there are sectors which are doing good. As I said, some of the sectors which are in non-profit organizations, some of the government-related agencies as well, they're doing fairly good. In private as well, it's picking up. Currently, there is no let's say classifications to say this is the best, this is the best company, this is not. There are different ratings, different standards, different frameworks used, and so you have these variations within the performance. Yeah. All right. 1 second. Yeah. So the result is it enough if the mother company has ESG based on local could create their own report as well based on HCN? Sorry, 1 second. Let me read this health. In Europe, is it enough if the mother company has its ESG report, or based on local regulations, subsidiaries should create their own report as well based on HCN revenue from 2025? So these regulations, as I said, have come out. So right now, there are, I think, around 50,000 companies, as I mentioned, and they will be looking at so wherever the company is legally set up, right? If you have two different companies, maybe they're having a mother company, but you have two different companies in different parts of the EU, they will have to declare. Okay, and if they are in those above a certain limit and so on, so they'll have to declare this. Okay, so so it will be separate. It will be based on the local regulation, subsidiaries, and so on and so forth, and they'll have to create their own report. Okay, so this will be mandatory from 2025 onwards. I haven't read the whole report from the European Commission. As I said, it is just released in July and going to get mandatory from 2025 onwards. So the companies have time to prepare and so on and so forth. But this is coming up very soon. Yeah, so as you can see, it's really important. Yes, Natalia, I believe this EIPM has a course on sustainability. What would be the dates? I don't have the dates on top of my head, but we will get back to you. We'll be releasing this on our EIPM LinkedIn page. So you keep looking for sustainability, decarbonation. We have courses on these as well at EIPM. So you could have keep looking on the EIPM LinkedIn page, and you'd get to know the next courses that we are picking up. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So any other questions? Thank you very much. If there are no more questions, thank you for joining. Yeah, you'll get the slides as we said. Is there something about biodiversity? Yes, there is. This falls in the E factor of the ESG, and it talks about protection of the biodiversity. As I said, even animal rights, the flora, fauna. Typically, we are talking about conservation of nature and so on and so forth. So there are companies who are today reporting, for example, companies that report which plant trees, for example, or protect the local environment, local biodiversity. So yes, this is a very strong part of the ESG reporting. It will fall under the E category of the ESG reporting. Definitely something on biodiversity. Okay, protection of environment, and it's not only offsetting. Okay, it's not only offsetting. It's a concrete measurement on how you are contributing positively to the biodiversity. All right, so there you go. Thanks, Eric, for sharing this sustainability course on the following year in March. Okay. All right, if there are, thank you, Maud. Any other questions? No. All right. Okay, so if there are no more questions, I thank you very much again, everyone. Ralph, hello there. Good to see you. You have Gabriela, thank you. Jacobo, Hotonen, everyone, thank you very much for joining, and hope to cross paths with you again sometime soon. All right, thank you, Gabriela. Hope to cross paths with you again sometime soon, Gabriela. Okay, good. Eric, I think if there are no more questions coming up, we are good to close this. Is that okay? Give a minute, maybe. We'll give a minute and then close this. Yeah, you can close the session if there's no more questions.